So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about my experience in the industry and what brought me to S2G. So I've about 20 years experience in the finance and seafood industry, as well as on the operational side. So in my career, I've really been looking for things that are undervalued, overlooked, and can drive forward progress very quickly. So I began my career as a tech investment banker, ended up starting a seafood-focused investment banking group. I ran that for about 12 years, and then I joined a company called Silver Bay Seafoods, who's a salmon producer up in Alaska. And while I was there, we built that company very quickly. I was one of the CFO, as a CFO and one of the shareholders, and it was a pretty good success. We were taking a resource that was underutilized. We were putting modern operational techniques into processes and accelerating it. So while that whole career was fun, the thing that I kept seeing was that the economic value that was being created throughout this industry was tied to an asset base that was in decline. And that came through all these exogenous climate issues, right? I think when I took a step and looked at what was happening in Alaska while we were there, we saw ocean acidity increasing, we saw warming water temperatures, we saw algae blooms. We actually saw water temperatures in Bristol Bay, which is the world's largest sockeye fishery, increase 10 degrees Fahrenheit in 1 year. What does that do? It changes the life cycle of salmon. It makes them smaller. Your yields drop, but it's really hitting a tipping point. And when I took a step back and looked at it, you start seeing this isn't a regional problem. This is a global issue. You see it in fisheries, but what we really quickly realized is that the entire fate of humanity and the earth is tied to the health of the oceans and the goods and services that it can provide us. So that brought me to S2G. Where we're really looking for solutions, educating people, and understanding how we can protect and restore this valuable resource. So to give people a high-level picture, I think a lot of folks in this room already know it, but the ocean is central to our global economy and livelihoods. It covers 70% of the planet. It moves 80% of the goods. It feeds 3 billion people worldwide as their primary protein. It's the world's largest carbon sink. Right, so it regulates weather and climate. It is essential to everything that is on this planet. It is a big industry. It is about a $5 trillion revenue industry a year, and the asset bases are valued at about $25 trillion. So not only is it a big economy, it's growing much faster than GDP and offers opportunity for investment where we can make a big impact and have financial returns. With that, we know it's a big economy, and we know it regulates the climate. And I think this is a really interesting graph. This is a graph showing heat accumulation in the oceans. A zettajoule, these are measured here in hundreds of zettajoules. A zettajoule is a measure of energy consumption and absorption. The world consumes about 0.5 zettajoules a year. The ocean has accumulated over 350 zettajoules. And what's happening? It's getting to capacity, right? So what we're seeing here, we continue to read about this. We keep seeing smashing records in the oceans day after day, month after month. I think we're on like a 18-month continuous run of hitting records. There's no sign of that turning around at this point. And what we're seeing now, historically looking at heat, is a divergence of the increases in temperatures from the ocean to land. So you can see that if you go back and think about that chart where the zettajoules jump up, now we're seeing a divergence because the ocean's at capacity on the heat. So now it's coming to land. It's accelerating heat and global warming worldwide. So, we think about this and we think about, the Paris Agreement and greenhouse gas goals. Obviously, those are important. It's a good way to measure it. But we also have to think about what else we measure climate change by. We think it needs to be measured by livelihoods. It needs to be measured by structural equity, health of people, security. It's measured by biodiversity. It's measured by resource preservation. With that, like I said, we are all dependent on it, and our future prosperity is dependent on the health of the ocean. When we took a step to really look at where we can dive in and make an impact, this is a report that's been put out by the UN high-level panel. It really aligned with a lot of the areas that we're focused on at S2G Oceans. And this chart here shows a study that 21% of the greenhouse gas emission goals by 2050 can be obtained by these areas within oceans. So we have renewable energy, we've got ocean-based transport, fisheries, carbon sequestration. So we've got a number of those there, and we've really built a thesis around that in investing. But we also understand this is only 21% of where we need to get to. And that is really why we are combined with the other verticals at S2G across food, ag, and energy, so we can achieve these goals in the future.
So hopefully most of you got to listen to Sanjeev's opening context setting today. It's actually like every year what people anticipate the most and are constantly asking for the deck afterwards, because it really does set a great macro context. And for us on the ocean, so as you heard him say, we really think about the three sectors that we work across as heavily commoditized sectors. And in oceans in particular, there are an awful lot of industries that operate on the oceans that are highly commoditized. If you think about global seafood, maritime shipping, oil and gas, and there's a number of system frictions that exist within the ocean sector that are also, you see the same pattern recognition in some of our other sectors. And some of those frictions in the oceans are really around the incumbency. So there's, in a lot of the industries, we can again take oil and gas, or we can take maritime shipping. There are a handful of actors who have a tremendous amount of power, and they control most of the market. And when that happens, there's a lack of innovation. It stifles innovation. There's a lack of competition, and that really makes it hard to swing industries in a new direction. Lack of access to capital. As innovations do emerge, they're so new and they're perceived as so risky that there's a lack of access to capital to really scale these types of businesses. And with that, there's also a lack of financial and business model innovation because of the lack of competition, because of the incumbency. It can be a very hard environment in which to create the change. I think the other thing is short-termism. I mean, this is just capitalism 101. A lot of these very large organizations, whether they're public or private, they're really focused on their quarter-end earnings, and so that creates a short-term thinking around bottom-line profitability that doesn't prevent them from thinking long-term. You'll talk to a lot of corporations, and they are thinking long-term, but to be able to really lift your head up and imagine what your business has to look like in a changing world and changing regulation can be a really hard thing to do when every 90 days you're really focused on delivering bottom line results for a group of stakeholders. So these are some of the frictions, systemic frictions that we experience in oceans, but they're also frictions that are being experienced in a global food economy, in the energy transition. In oceans in particular, which I do think is different from the other sectors that at least we invest in, is that oceans have largely been ignored. It's kind of a out of sight, out of mind problem. A lot of people, oceans are not in their front of mind consciousness because they don't experience, the impacts that climate is having on the oceans and on some of those industries. They are felt by humans, but humans don't necessarily attach that to the oceans in the same way when they go to the grocery store and they're paying, crazy prices for their food because of inflation. They're attaching that to potentially a broken food system. Or when they are experiencing brownouts in the middle of summer in LA because they've reached capacity. There's a real way that we feel the challenges of our energy system and our food systems that oceans just hasn't had the same connection to people. And so as a result, the oceans have been kind of left behind a little bit when it comes to rethinking how to restructure the system. And so they've been undermeasured, undiscovered, underregulated, and honestly underinvested. I mean, we say it all the time, and it's probably a familiar statistic here, but the SDG 14, life underwater, is the least invested of all the SDGs. But for us, there's a real opportunity in that. And we are seeing things change. There are signals that have been picking up for the past 4 years that give us, as investors, we see a tremendous amount of opportunity. I think that people, it is the decade of the ocean. I think people are starting to understand, as climate change becomes dinner table conversation, people are starting to connect the fact that our climate is literally regulated by the ocean. So these huge climatic events, which is how a lot of people experience climate change, are being driven by weather patterns because of the way that the oceans are being impacted. So I do think oceans are coming more kind of center of mind for people. Governments and regulatory bodies are starting to regulate their way to emission reduction in the industry. So like the IMO policies around maritime shipping are really inspiring. There needs to be more, it needs to have teeth, like there's a lot, but like we're starting to see countries and regulating bodies taking really big steps towards kind of starting to control and push industries in a direction where innovation is going to have an opportunity to compete with kind of the incumbents. And finally, and I think you hopefully heard this from Sanjeev this morning, is that in a world where we live in resource scarcity, if we can find opportunities through innovation to drive resource efficiencies, then capital is going to flow, change is going to flow, and we're going to start seeing the restructuring of these systems. Because again, like if you can impact the bottom line, ultimately that's what's really going to make businesses shift. So we're really excited, and again, something that we don't have to tell a lot of people in this room, but the ocean is a tremendous asset. A lot of people say to us, oh, it's such a nascent sector. And you're like, it's not nascent, actually. I mean, like the shipping companies have been around for decades and decades. Oil and gas, government and defense. I mean, these are places where lots of people have put money and lots of people continue to put money. And again, like there's so much opportunity that we have to stop thinking about the ocean as this like cute little nascent emergent space and like give it the credit that it deserves, which is that it dominates our globe and it's the opportunity of our lifetime. So at S2G, when we think about our investment thesis, we really think about themes that are driving the unlock that we're looking for that enables innovation and investable opportunities in subsectors. So for us, there's really 4 themes that drive a lot of the things that we look at and think about daily. The first is ocean intelligence. So there's been a lack of data collected, or at least an aggregation and sharing of that data. But the emerging technology that can access data, make it pervasive, make it available, and create insights out of that to help industry, government, NGOs like make decisions is such a huge unlock for so many things that operate on and in the ocean. So we spend a lot of time thinking about ocean intelligence. That's what we call it. Decarbonization, again, lots of regulatory bodies are starting to demand the shifts in the industries, and that is a huge tailwind. Blue foods, I mean, we have growing population that is middle class. A lot of those growing populations, their primary consumption is seafood. And so we have a protein scarcity issue on our planet, and we need to think of better ways to produce one of the most efficient proteins, but also one of the most consumed proteins for the places in the world where protein consumption is really increasing. So there's a lot of opportunity in thinking about the tailwinds behind protein production. And then finally, blue biotech, which I don't think talk about enough. This is probably a little bit more of the nascent space, but there's over a million different, there's millions and millions of species in the ocean, and every year we're discovering thousands and thousands of species, life elements that have never been discovered before. And the opportunity for those things to become healthcare products, they're using like carp to heal wounds and Asparagopsis to potentially reduce methane in cattle. I mean, what the ocean can provide that we have underutilized in the past or haven't discovered is tremendous. So we think that these are themes that drive investable opportunities, and we have invested in a good 17 companies at this point over the past 3 or 4 years that align behind a lot of these themes and these tailwinds. Many of them are in the room today, and you should meet them all if you haven't. They're very inspiring. And we also, I think the other thing that is exciting for us is that it's actually a big room, and we need more people, we need more capital, but there are a lot of people, and a lot of people you might not expect that are at the table really interested in leaning into the opportunities across the industries. And we've been really fortunate to build great relationships and do a lot of co-investing, unlocking opportunities for our portfolio companies through some of the networks that S2G has across the food, ag, energy, and ocean space.